finally we come up and the sun comes out, and it's like, the sun is hot there, even when it's cold out, like you're high at altitude. So the sun kind of just has a lot of strength. I'm sweating like a pig. I'm just soaking wet. And the guy pulls up next to us, and we're trying to get to Snowbird, and he looks at us like we're crazy. He's like, "You're trying to walk there? Like, why would you walk there? Like, you could have just skied there." And he's like, "You're like a mile away." And but at this point we're committed, and so we have to like hoof it.
Welcome to the Where Have You Been podcast. I'm your host, Bill Ream, and each week on the pod, I have conversations with incredible guests from all walks of life. Expect to hear funny, crazy, emotional, life-changing, and even sometimes life-threatening stories and experiences that will entertain and inspire you. As always, I appreciate your likes, subscriptions, ratings, and reviews wherever you are listening. It doesn't sound like much, but it truly helps the pod get to the ears of more people who may enjoy it. And check out the website, whybpodcast.com, for links to the socials where you can find pictures from the guests and their stories, and also buy merch if you're so inclined. Now let's get to this week's episode. Thank you for being here. So welcome back. We have another great guest today, and our guest today, Rob, has a little more unique take on travel than maybe most of us do. And so I guess let's just jump right in without further ado. Rob, who are you?
Thanks, Bill. I am Robert DeLena, Rob DeLena. I live in Sudbury, Massachusetts. I was born in Revere, Massachusetts. I live in Sudbury now with my wife, Mary Beth, and my two children, adult children now, Ryan, who's be 24 in a couple of days, and Abigail, who's 22. Abigail's about to graduate college, and Ryan is off on his own. He's a professional rock climbing guide and a ski guide, and he's a big part of my travel, I think, is because of Ryan. So you'll hear all about that.
So I'm looking forward to that very much. What do you do, Rob?
So I'm a lawyer, I guess, by training. I was an unhappy lawyer, practiced for a couple of years, and then I started a recruiting company to help lawyers find jobs about 25 years ago, I think. And so I've been a headhunter essentially ever since. I was a guy who worked from home before anybody worked from home, and before it was fashionable, and been running this small business for a long time now.
Excellent. And you are also an author. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I, kind of by happenstance, my son and I wrote a book called Without Restraint, which came out a couple of years ago. You can find it on Amazon and anywhere books are sold. There's an audiobook version of it as well. It's pretty good. And it chronicles my son's journey, as a, kind of a unique kid. We called him probably a special needs kid back then, but as it turned out, he really was a misunderstood kid, and he was misunderstood both by doctors and teachers, but also by his parents, who I think, looking at their first child who wasn't perfect, we really wanted him to be perfect. And we allowed, people to talk us into some really terrible schools and, a lot of medication that he didn't need. And, as his life was really going off the rails in school, and, he even spent a couple of weeks in a mental hospital. By happenstance, we discovered skiing one day, out of desperation. I was just looking for something to do, and took him to this little hill near our house, and I saw a different kid that day and embarked on a 10-year odyssey really to ski all over the country and all over the world. And in doing so, I saw a much different kid, and I realized that everybody was wrong about Ryan, including myself, and started to take some of those lessons I was learning watching him on the ski hill back to the schools and back to our home. And really, we started parenting him a lot differently and asking everybody else to look at him differently. And it was more of a challenge than you might think, because once people sort of had an expectation about who he was, it was really hard to unravel that. So the book is kind of two books in one. Ryan wrote his version and I wrote my version. And it's really about a kid who was struggling in all aspects of life, but really found the freedom to be himself as we traveled the world and explored these ski hills. And I think one of the fun parts of the book was I was really this beginner skier, and Ryan got really good really fast, and I had to improve or die. And so a lot of our early stories are about me skiing down runs and places I never should have been, but I really just wanted him to be happy. I was willing to throw myself, down a hill if that's what it took. So it's a really fun book. It's a quick read. People really like it. And I think it's offered some hope to parents and children, and in some difficult circumstances. I can't promise all the answers because our story is unique, but I think I have a pretty good handle. If when people ask me about what not to do, I can tell you about all my mistakes for sure. So a long answer to a short question, but I am an author. Ryan and I co-wrote the book together, and it's a great read. I hope people will check it out.
Not sure if you mentioned the title. You probably did, but
Yeah.
tell us again, and where do we find it?
It's called Without Restraint, and it's on Amazon and really anywhere books are sold. And there's also on Audible. The audio book version is pretty good. Unfortunately, they wouldn't let Ryan and I read it. They wanted professionals to do it, so there's no Boston accents when they do it. But I still think it's pretty authentic. So Without Restraint, you'll find it everywhere.
And I'll definitely link that as well so that
Thank
people
you.
can take a look at it. So the little bit of the story that I know is very fascinating, and I kind of, in a way, I sort of wish we had that type of podcast, because although I'm sure you've talked ad nauseum, but I also feel like you probably don't get tired of that because it's such a significant part of your life. But I do want
Yeah,
to
no,
know.
I think one of the reasons, when we talked about about the podcast and whether or not I was a fit, I was so excited to do your show because we have told the story a million times, and this was really the kind of the fun part that we don't get into is the journey, and the places we went and the people we met along the way. It was such a big part of it. It really was, and every new place was like a little small victory where I proved to everybody that he could, drive in a car to New Hampshire or drive to Vermont, and then it was fly to Colorado or fly to Utah and then fly to South America. And then, I won't spoil it, but we went to some crazy places. And with each one, I think he was a little different when we came back and I was a little different. So we're excited. I'm excited to tell you all about it.
Okay, thanks, Rob. I was already excited about this, and now I'm just like super stoked. So this is great. I do want to know, before we get into that stuff, was travel a thing for you even before Ryan was born? Was it something you always enjoyed?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's actually a funny answer. I'd say so. I grew up literally on a runway at Logan Airport. I mean, planes went over my house that I could have hit with a tennis ball in a place called Beachmont, which was part of Revere, Massachusetts. And everybody I knew, or growing up, worked at the airport. A whole street worked at the airport. My mother took a job at the airport, so she worked for Pan Am back in the day when you could fly for free and standby travel. We could stand by on any airline, and this is in the '70s. And airlines, really had no they didn't really have good numbers as to how, whether a flight was oversold. So there was a lot of inefficiencies in the system. This was, long before computers ever existed. We could go anywhere. Unfortunately, my parents were sort of like island beach people, so most of our travel was to I think every Caribbean island. But we did go. We went to Ireland. I have one. We're Italian, but I have one Irish grandfather. My mother's father was Irish, and we went to Ireland. Which was kind of the first big trip. I went to Rio with my mom and a friend of hers and a friend of mine, which was kind of an adventurous trip. So we did some international travel, but I look back and think, how did we not go to Europe or Asia? And I don't think we took full advantage of it. But for a very blue collar family without a lot of resources, I did get to go to some cool places and always flew, or most of the time flew first class because that's where the standby tickets put you, which spoiled
Yeah.
me for life. I cannot go back to economy. So it was a mixed blessing.
Not let alone the budget airlines, probably.
Definitely no. I have yet to set foot on Southwest, which makes me sound like a jerk, but I have been ruined officially.
He's a travel diva. That's okay. It is what it is.
It is what it is, for sure.
So, but travel really became a thing even more once Ryan was born, and once you got to that point where you realized that skiing became a thing for him. And
Yeah, I'd say in the beginning when he was so difficult, we really had to pick our spots. I mean, we went, we did the obligatory Disney trip when he was probably 7, and Abigail the sister was 5, and it was horrendous. I mean, he was just ill-equipped. He couldn't wait for anything, and we even had like the special pass that you could get if you had a doctor's note, so we could cut all the lines. But even then, you're still waiting, and that was rough. So we went to a lot of beach destinations, things he liked, but we really we weren't that adventurous. And at that point, and really it was skiing that kind of opened my eyes that he could do a lot more than everybody thought.
what was I don't know if you said or if I didn't ask for sure. What was Ryan diagnosed with? Is it autism?
Yeah, well, back then, you were kind of either autistic or you weren't. And Ryan was so verbal, he clearly wasn't autistic. The spectrum was just starting to come out, and it wasn't, there was Asperger's, and he really kind of fit that, but not really. So his official diagnosis is called pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. You'll hear PDD-NOS a lot. And if you write that down or you think about it in your head, it's pervasive, it's developmental, it's a disorder, and it's not otherwise specified. So really, it was this catch-all diagnosis that told
Very
you
vague.
absolutely nothing and got you services, from insurance companies and from your town. So, if I look back now if you met Ryan, I don't think Ryan had anything. I mean, I don't think he should have been diagnosed with anything except maybe some overparenting and some teachers who, were frustrated by a kid who wouldn't sit still. He's probably more ADHD than anything else, and he can hyper focus on things, and he's pretty fast moving, I think. But in the end, he's like a lot of us. He's a little different, and he's got some great strengths and some superpowers. Really, I think the ADHD sometimes is a superpower. And some of his deficits, were social. I think when he was a little kid, I think he was so focused on what he was doing. Sometimes he would miss cues and he would miss some of the obvious emotion, with other people. I think we just read too much into a lot of that, honestly. He's Ryan. If you met him, you'd say, he's a great guy. He's a little different, but he's a great guy.
In the end, he's just an incredible human being.
Absolutely, for sure. And I think when you look at your kid, sometimes you think he's kind of like me on steroids. Like everything that I'm good at, he's a little better at. Everything that maybe I'm weak at, he was just maybe a little weaker. He just took it to another level. And I think if it was the 70s, he would have been at the principal's office, and he would have stayed after school a lot, and people would have just had to deal with it. And unfortunately, in the 2000s, with everybody was just hyper focused on every flaw a kid might have, and trying to fix it and correct it instead of just maybe letting him outgrow some of this stuff. So we made some mistakes, and luckily it turned out okay, and travel was a big part of that, thankfully.
Yeah. Well, I will definitely be listening. I find it tough to have time to read, but I will definitely be listening to the audiobook. So it's
Yeah,
fantastic, and it sounds very
honestly.
inspiring.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
audiobook's really it's good. It really is. I think, I mean, I'm an audiobook guy too. I mean, I listen to it, and I any book that I get recommended, I listen as well. So don't, you're not going to lose much with the audiobook for sure. It's great.
Excellent. All right. Well, let's head right into the meat of the podcast. And I say this with every guest, and I'll just reiterate with you: you're welcome to list, or you're welcome to just jump into a place that you want to start off with. But let's get into it. So, Rob, where have you been?
So I'm going to do it sort of chronologically, and it sort of tracks the story of the book. But I'm going to blow through some of the early stuff. I mean, when we started skiing locally, we live, in Massachusetts, so New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine are very accessible. There's a lot of great resorts, in the New England area. But if I was going to recommend one resort for people from other parts of the country to travel to, Stowe, Vermont is a really beautiful resort. It's very high end. They built it up a ton. A lot of money, a lot of investment went in there. Really nice hotels and condos, but also a great place to ski, and really challenging terrain. Probably the most challenging in New England. But there's a lot of great beginner hills, and there's a lot to do. There's an ice skating rink. The restaurants are great. The town of Stowe is like the quintessential New England town, super cutesy, and a lot of shops, and really nice vibe. So that's the one place I think I would highlight in all the places we skied in New England. That would be worth getting on a plane and traveling to. I mean, you'd fly either to Boston, which would leave you about 3 hours away, or Burlington, Vermont. If you could get to Burlington, it would leave you about 45 minutes away. So Stowe was kind of a big part of our story. It was the first place we went for weekends and stayed overnight, and where Ryan really demonstrated some of his early ski skills, and he was able to do some really advanced terrain there.
And I assume, Rob, that skiing was a thing for you first.
Yeah, so I mean, I hadn't skied much. I mean, I skied a tiny bit as a kid, like one or two times. And so I hadn't skied in 25 years. And so when I took Ryan that day, I kind of remembered how to click into my skis, but I didn't remember anything else. And when I was trying to describe to him how to ski, I gave him complete the absolute worst advice, like riding a bike and turning your shoulders and like not things I you're supposed to do the opposite of that. I didn't remember any of this because nobody had taught me. So when we went that day and it was a good day and we went back the next day, with each place I went, I was kind of figuring it out on the fly myself as well. So in fact, there's a story in Stowe when he wanted to ski. Skiing is like greens, blues, blacks, double blacks. Double blacks are the hardest. That they have big signs like that say extreme terrain, experts only. And he was on his like fifth or sixth ski day, and he wanted to do a double black at Stowe, and I forbade him. I was like, no way. When you're 12, maybe, which would have been 5 years from then. But he just skied up to the entrance to this thing and ditched me and then did it. And I was left with trying to decide to either follow him in, knowing I would die. So I chickened out and I skied around it to the bottom, and then I met him at the bottom, and I watched him ski the whole thing, and I was like, well, he's way better than I realized, and all I could do was pat him on the head and tell him I was proud of him because
What the heck?
he had the guts to do it, and he was just really good on his feet. He had great balance, and he didn't panic, and so from there, I think. We
Wait. What? So, having not skied since you were younger, what made you decide that was something that you wanted to try with him? Just the openness of it, and the like. He's not going to get hurt if he falls down on a bunny hill. It's okay.
I don't have an answer. So, I mean, we were in Christmas vacation, and vacations were really hard in the winter because, at this point he was 7 and his sister was 5, and we didn't really have any activities other than letting them play in the house or playing outside in the snow, and that would end in tears, within an hour, and then I would throw them in the car and. I used to go to Home Depot a lot, and we'd walk around Home Depot, and I would just, kill an hour there and leave with some giant saw that he made me buy that I never knew how to use, or some, wrench.
He could show you today.
I could open a fire hydrant with, that I never would need, and my wife would yell at me for spending, $100. And I just, I was desperate. And then this one day he got in a fight with his sister, and it was probably like the 8th day in a row that had happened. And I just threw him in the car, and I remember driving by Neshoba, this little ski hill. There was a soccer place, one of those indoor soccer places where we went to some birthday parties that probably ended in tears. And I don't know, I must have filed it in the back of my head, like, maybe try this one day. It was either fate. I don't know what you believe in, but I was just driven to go there, with no plan. We didn't have, I think I stuck a bike helmet on his head and gave him some gloves and a coat. And I had basically the same. I didn't think we'd get through the rental process. That was my biggest. I was like, if we get through that, maybe we have a shot of at least skiing. Before I knew it, we were on the little magic carpet, that airport people mover that takes you up the bunny hill.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. And he skied down and made a bank turn back to the line without any. I didn't know how he did it. And then all of a sudden I fumbled my way down, and we went up again. And it was.
And a few days later, he's teaching the other kids.
And then literally, if I counted the ski days, Stowe was we probably went one more day to Neshoba. We went to another Massachusetts mountain called Wachusett. And then we went to Loon Mountain in New Hampshire a couple times. So when he did that double black at Stowe, he had been on skis maybe 5 or 6 days, which is unheard of. Like nobody does that. Most people are still on the baby bunny slope their 5th or 6th day. So it just clicked for him. And I saw how happy it made him and how free he was. And it was the first place, Ryan had spent his whole childhood being told not to do, Ryan, get down, Ryan, get off of that, Ryan, you can't do that. And this was the one place where, number one, I couldn't keep up with him, so he could do whatever he wanted. And even when he was kind of pushing the envelope, people clapped, people, called out, hey, look at that kid, he's up there, he's in the woods. Risk was not just tolerated, but it was rewarded, and I think it finally gave him a place to be himself, and he was a risk taker. He did want to climb on things and jump off things. And he was he was kind of a regular boy in a lot of ways. And I don't know, what happened to us as a society, but we've stopped letting these kids, skin their knees a little bit and get back up. And so I think I think that clicked. And, as he got better, I could kind of stay on my feet. I was a very technically inept skier, but I'm short and, strong, and was an athlete in college. And I could kind of just stay up if I had to. And it wasn't pretty, but I could do it. And so that's how we skied a lot of those early trips. It really wasn't until we got out west where the runs are just so massive and the stakes are so high. where I really was put in positions that I shouldn't have been. And I had to make some, decisions to let him go by himself because, at that point I was 40. And, part of my analysis was, all right, this is risky. What happens if I get hurt? If I tear
Hmm.
my ACL, like this is over.
Yeah.
He can't do this without me. So it was a stressful time in some ways, but there were moments when I'd be up there and look around and think, oh, this is pretty awesome. Like I see why people like this. I just wish I was better at it so I didn't have to worry about getting killed.
Yeah. Well, tell me about some of the stories that happened, either, continuing on from when you were in New Hampshire or when you started to head out west or wherever. You tell me where you want to
Yeah.
take this.
So the first trip we
And
took out west was, and this was, we went as a family. My wife encouraged us to do it. It was a February break. The next year, it was the second year we had skied. We went to Vail in Colorado, and Vail is, kind of your perfect, west, Rockies resort. I mean the massive resort, tons of terrain. The Back Bowls area in Vail, which is this massive area really behind the resort that where all the trees had been burned out. I think legend has it was sort of when the cowboys and were chasing Native Americans around and try to root them out. I think they lit everything on fire. So this whole area had been burned out and created this massive bowl space of skiing. And it's really a unique place in terms of its scale. And it's a high end. Vail's a high end resort. I mean, there's a ton of really bunch of really beautiful condominiums and hotels, and there's different villages you can access, a lot of high-end retail. And that was my first taste, I think, with skiing in sort of kind of an exclusive resort area. But it's also that first experience where you look and think, all right, this has a lot to offer for everybody. I mean, there are people here in $1,000 ski outfits and all these sort of labeled clothes and fancy coats, but then there are just hardcore skiers and they're just getting after it who are there and, they don't care what they have on. And so that's the kind of thing I sort of liked about the sport was you could really make it anything you wanted. And so for Vail, I think it was the first opportunity as a family where my wife and daughter were just beginners and, my daughter was a little slower to like it. I think because Ryan liked it so much, so they spent a lot of time in retail and buying hot chocolates and sitting and having, a snack while Ryan and I were tearing it up in the back bowls and exploring the mountain. And it was at that point way over my head. I mean, I should not have been skiing in some of these areas. And he ditched me at one point. There's a run called Dragon's Teeth, which is appropriately named because it's this cliff area, and it had all these cliff signs like you will die, kind of signs.
oh my
And
gosh.
he insisted on going, and I was like, I'm not going there. Like, what are you out of your mind? And I was like, you should not go either. This is a terrible idea. Get back here. And he just ignored me, of course. And he went, and I had to kind of ski around, and I could see when he got to this little cliff area, and he launched off it, and he probably it was probably about 10 feet high. At this point, he had beginner equipment on. We had rental equipment really, and he of course explodes when he hits the ground. All his skis fall off, and I thought maybe he got hurt, but I watched him sort of pick himself up, and he put his skis back on, and then he skied down to me, and the first thing he said was, "Dad, I need better equipment next year." And I said, "All right, check."
Not that the run was too difficult.
No,
It just wasn't the
it
appropriate gear.
was you gave me this lousy crap, Dad, and that's why I fell. So we had a good time in Vail. It was it was a lot. It was stressful, but I think we had a good taste of getting out there. And then the next season, he and I.
Did you when you were in Vail, did you basically stay there like in the resort or did you
Yeah.
actually get to
So there's
travel around
there's
a little bit?
there's like I want to say there's two villages and they're accessible by bus. I mean, you can ski to them, but when you're on the at ground level, I think that you could only get to them by bus. And in either village, there's a variety of accommodations. I mean, from the Four Seasons and the Ritz, to something a little more sane and affordable. A lot of condos. There's a lot of it was built up pretty big with condos. So I think there's really no outside the resort there. Like
Yeah.
you're kind of there or you're not. But there's so much there that you're going to have access to tons of restaurants and stuff to do, and ice skating rink, and there's all kinds of kids activities. It's a really fun resort. I mean, Vail. I think the only downside with Vail is you fly into Denver, and it's about 2 hours through the pass. And the pass can sometimes close for snow conditions. So sometimes you can get stuck, and there's always a stress of missing your flight. But it's one of those places once you get to it's really kind of a magical place. I really liked it a lot. We went back one more time. I want to say a few years later, we all went back when we were all better skiers at that point, and I think I enjoyed it a lot more. But even then, I still was kind of newish, and I wasn't that good. I was getting better, but I'd like to go now. I think I could really explore it and see everything that everybody talks about. But it's a cool place. When we next year we went back out, we went out west a few times. When Ryan and I went alone, I remember looking and thinking that Utah seemed easier because I had heard Boston had a lot of nonstops into Salt Lake. And then from Salt Lake, you have a choice of several resorts, all of which are about 45 minutes from the airport. We chose Snowbird and Alta, which are resorts that they kind of share terrain. So they're two separate resorts from a hotel standpoint, accommodation standpoint, but from a skiing standpoint, you can ski from one to the other with a pass. So the first year we went, I think we stayed in Alta, but then we started to stay in Snowbird. I like Snowbird better. There's a hotel in Snowbird called the Cliff Lodge, which is right at the base of the resort. It looks like a Soviet style, it's like made out of cement because of for avalanche reasons. So it looks a little stark on the outside, but it's really nice inside. They've upgraded it a couple times in the years since we've been going there. There's not a lot to do in Snowbird when you're up, because you have to go up the Little Cottonwood Canyon, which is it's about probably a 20-minute ride up the mountain. And it's part of a national forest, so the development is pretty limited up there. So there's really just a handful of restaurants, but it's a skier's paradise kind of place. I mean, you walk out your door, endless terrain. I mean, in some of the best terrain on earth, really. And the snow in Utah, the powder, they call it champagne powder. It's this dry, fluffy snow, and they just get tons and tons and tons of it. You can go there we've gone Thanksgiving week. I mean, anytime really from like late November. And they've had years where they stay open till July. I mean, they'll stay, just on weekends. They'll keep the resort open in the summer because they get.
Can you tell a difference between the powder and the snow in Utah and a Vail? Like, if you've done it enough?
Yeah, I'd say Vail and Utah are probably pretty similar. Where there is a difference, I've gone to Tahoe a lot, which is, so you get that sort of California. It's a lot, they call it Sierra cement. It's wetter, heavier, but they get these huge dumps. I mean, it's still powder, but I think it doesn't have that sort of wispy fluffiness that you'll find maybe in Utah. But, and it's certainly back east, we get a lot of man-made snow, which is, you can definitely tell the difference between that and natural snow. So Utah has that, I think, that advantage. And it's very consistent. I mean, there's very few years. Like a place like Tahoe, you'll have these massive years, and then they'll have some drought years. I think even Vail can have some years like that. You're not going to really see that in Utah. So Utah, I think, if you're going to go somewhere out west for the first time and you're planning ahead and you're not watching the weather and you're not jumping on a plane on a weekend, you're planning like your February school vacation or your March school break. That's the safest bet, I think. And Snowbird and Alta are a great destination if you're looking to just really get after it, ski and snowboard. And Snowbird, Alta does not allow snowboards. They only allow skiers. Snowbird allows both. But there's other resorts, Park City, which is the town where the movie festival was for long years. I think this is their last year. The Sundance is now moving someplace, but the Sundance Film Festival is in Park City. And it's it's kind of like an old cowboy town, feels sort of like an old Western town. There's a resort, Park City has its own resort. They purchased a resort called the Canyons that are accessible with a crossover lift. And Canyons is just sort of like around the other side. To drive from Canyons to Park City Resort is about a half hour, believe it or not, but you can ski to them. That you have to remember, like, these mountains are so massive that at the top, it's not that far from one peak to the other. But at the bottom, when they can be, you have to drive around, it can be in a half hour. So there's the canyons at Park City are now linked and are resulted in a massive resort, really a cool destination. I would say if you're going to go to Utah for the first time and you want more to do, you really want a restaurant scene, or you want to be able to go to a movie or something, or walk around town, Park City probably makes more sense than Snowbird because there's just more to do. But if I had to pick from a skier standpoint, I like Snowbird much better. I don't want to say I didn't love Park City, but the couple of times I've skied at Park City, I always felt like, I was always in the wrong place, or I was the lift I wanted was, someplace else, or it didn't connect and make as much sense to me as Snowbird does for some reason. And that sometimes can just be the day you're having or my own ineptitude, that I was just always in the wrong place. But I didn't like it as much. Canyons, I think, is a nice little resort, little, compared to some of the other ones, but it's got some great terrain. It's got some high end hotels. Canyons it's a newer developed area, and I think there's some great places to stay. If you have little kids, the Canyons is a great resort. And if you were a mom and dad who were a little more adventurous and you wanted to cross over to Park City and leave your kids in ski school in Canyons, I mean that would be a pretty good option as well. And like I said, you'd have more to do, restaurant wise, and at night, I think there'd be a little more nightlife. I haven't been to some of the other Utah ones, Brighton. I've been to Solitude, which is a little kind of a little more local flavored resort. But the point is that Utah has, all of these resorts are within 45 minutes of Salt Lake City Airport, and there's tons of flights into Salt Lake City. You don't have to make a stop. It's a hub for Delta. It's a great airport, and so I'd say Utah is a great first taste of skiing out west in the Rockies for sure.
How many times have you been there?
Oh God, I've been to Snowbird 12 or 13, I don't know, 15, a lot of times. That was the one we could look at, and I could decide on a Thursday, that we're going to go on a Saturday. It was an easy trip to put together. I remember one time Ryan's birthday is May 7th, and he and I were going to go do this backcountry run called Tuckerman Ravine, which is in New Hampshire. It's like this sort of rite of passage, climb the mountain yourself, ski down. And it was the first time we were ever going to do it. And it rained like the whole week before. And and it was,
Washed out all the
he was
snow.
devastated. Yeah, it washed out all the snow. It turned everything to ice. And I remember walking in, he was just, devastated. I said, "Do you want to go to Snowbird?" He said, yes. And I went upstairs, boom, booked the thing, and we were on the plane the next day. I mean, it's that kind of place. So we've been there a lot.
Tell me any specific stories from Utah since you've been there so many times?
So Snowbird is in the first couple of times we were there, the hardest part for me was figuring out how to get around and not lose him, particularly where the resort connected to Alta, which is a totally separate resort. The first time we went to Alta, and this is like internet days. He would research all these mountains on the internet, but we may have had phones, but there were no apps or anything like that with maps. And I'm one of these guys. I'm like the classic dad driver. I refuse to ask directions, and I never would learn the names of any trails or any lakes. And so I was always flying blind. And we went to Alta, and we skied for a couple of runs. And it was the first time we'd ever skied in deep powder. And we both kept falling, and he never falls. So he was getting a little frustrated. I couldn't stay on my feet. I just didn't understand how people could do it, because I would just go for like 10 feet and I would just fall. And so
what happens with that? Do you have to be going faster or something?
You know what? I think we were overturning. When you're on groomed runs, it's almost like you're on an ice skating rink. It's like it's really hard packed, and you can really work your edges and turn hard with each turn. And I think we were so used to doing that. When you're in the softer snow, it's a little more zen-like. You're kind of like going with the flow, like you're surfing almost. I think we were just working it too hard. And he picked it up after the first run or two. He was able to do it. I kept falling, basically throughout the day. But and also we were on these really skinny skis, like powder skis are really fat, and we just rented equipment. So we were on these, like, I'll use some numbers. Like we were on 85s, which is, a race ski would be like a 78, like really skinny skis. Nowadays we ski on like 110s, which are, like 60-70% fatter, and they're almost like surfboards. You're wearing these big pontoons on both feet. It's a lot easier to stay on your feet. So we were frustrated. He was frustrated. I was frustrated. And then I said, well, why don't we go over to Snowbird? Maybe it'll be better over there. And I thought, it would be just like we would kind of go through a gate and all of a sudden we'd be at Snowbird. Well, that's the case at the very top. Now, we were there and it was Thanksgiving week. A lot of the mountain wasn't open yet. So we couldn't figure out exactly how to get to Snowbird. He convinces me that he knows a way kind of in the middle of the mountain to go. And so we start cutting through these woods, and I'm life or death to stay on my feet. And all of a sudden, we find ourselves on this road, and I'm like, this can't be right. And so we take off our skis and we just start walking and walking and walking. And finally we come up and the sun comes out, and it's like, the sun is hot there, even when it's cold out, like it's you're high at altitude. So the sun kind of just has a lot of strength. I'm sweating like a pig. I'm just soaking wet. And the guy pulls up next to us and we're trying to get to Snowbird, and he looks at us like we're crazy. He's like, "You're trying to walk there? Like, why would you walk there? Like, you could have just skied there." And he's like, "You're like a mile away." But at this point we're committed, and so we have to like hoof it through. Now, when we in the book, I think we talk about the story. In his version, it was all my fault, and in my version, it was all his fault. So we both have different recollections about whose idea it was, who decided to try to go from the bottom, and who refused to turn around once we were halfway in and realized we had screwed up. And so
Well, you're the guest today. I'll let Ryan tell his sometime if we have him on.
when you hear his version, he will blame me 100% like that. And I'm following this dummy, and I'm surprised I'm still alive. He's probably right. So we finally get to a place where we could ski into Snowbird, and we ended up running into a family that we know from our town, and we ended up staying, hanging with them for the next 3 or 4 days, and it sort of turned the trip around. But we had some early mishaps. I think most of them were just not really knowing what we were doing or where we were going.
Was the skiing easier once you got there, or did you remember if it was any different?
There was pretty much the same terrain and the same snow. I think Snowbird just laid out a little better. I was able to sort of discern what was over my head and what wasn't, just kind of by looking. It felt like, we were, I think because the upper part of Alta, the mountain wasn't open yet, we were in sort of a lot of the middle terrain at Alta there's a lot of trees. And to me, everything looked alike. So the difference between one trail and the other trail, you're just in the middle of these big, aspen trees or pine trees or whatever they are, these, big evergreen trees. I just couldn't tell where I was, and I really struggled. Whereas Snowbird, I think, was a little more open, and it was pretty obvious whether you had to make a commitment to either be in the trees or not be in the trees. When I wasn't in the trees, I think I was able to sort of see where I wanted to go and pick easier lines for me. At that point, I was more or less an intermediate skier, I would say, but I shouldn't have been on any of the expert runs. And when we went to a resort for the first time or even the 10th time, he had a list of runs he wanted to do, and they always were the expert runs. That was the only thing he was interested in. So, at this point, he's, 7, 8, 9, 10. And we didn't have phones. So like if we separated, it wasn't easy to reconnect.
Yeah.
We tried these little radios, but we would always interfere with ski patrol, and we could hear the ski patrol all day long, and we couldn't hear each other. And so we gave up on those. And then I ended up getting him a cell phone kind of early on in the game, which didn't always work, but at least I had some way. If I kept calling eventually, maybe he'd have a signal, but it was imperfect, but it was a little more of a comfort than nothing. But as we got to go, and I think that's why we went back to Snowbird a lot, was because there was a comfort factor in knowing it. Whenever we'd go to a new place, I would stress out a bit. And so it's funny.
Yeah, and probably if you lost each other, you probably had a place you just kind of knew, like, I'll get you there.
And he knew where the hotel was, so I knew like eventually he'd find his way back. But there was always something exciting about going somewhere new, and I think that sometimes I'd let him talk me into it. And we did go. We went to Mammoth, California, which is a beautiful resort. We went New Year's Day, or like that sort of New Year's holiday weekend. And it was a little early. Like they'd had a lot of snow, but they really hadn't, they get like 500-600 inches. And so a lot of the mountain was open, but it really wasn't like great conditions. But it's a huge resort, massive. Yeah, a little tough to get to. I mean, it's almost easier from LA to drive than from San Francisco. You have to kind of go down and around, but you can fly. There is an airport at Mammoth. It looks like a military base. They kind of throw your bags out onto the runway when the plane lands. I mean, there's really no sort of terminal. I mean, there is a tiny one, but we did fly there. So we flew San Francisco, and then we flew San Francisco to Mammoth, and then we stayed in a pretty terrible hotel. But like I said, back then we we would always pick the ones closest to the lifts because he didn't want to waste any time getting skiing. It was kind of this old dorm-like structure. I don't even remember the name, but they have some much nicer accommodations at different. I think there's a Westin that's pretty nice. That was a different part of the mountain. So we had places like that were really hard, I think, to learn in the first trip. And had we gone back to Mammoth multiple times, I think I would like it better. I'd only been there the one time. We've been to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, I think now 2 or 3 times. Kind of the same thing. I mean, Jackson Hole is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. We've been in the summer and the winter. If you go in the summer, you can access both Teton National Park and Yellowstone National Park. It's a great summer trip for families.
Did you do that? Did you go to the parks?
Yeah, we did the park, and we took a van. We had like a 12-hour van tour, which sounds long, but it's so big. And you get out at all the sort of highlights. The Old Faithful. There's a massive waterfall. I forget the name of it. One of the most beautiful places I've ever been. I mean, Yellowstone was one of the few places I think you go someplace and the Eiffel Tower, and you're like, yep, that's kind of what I expected, But
Yeah.
when you're in Yellowstone, you're like, wow, this is way better than I expected. Like I did not prepare myself for how beautiful this is.
Yeah, because I don't think there's any way. Some places there's just no way to really convey it in photographs or videos. I've definitely been to places like that where nothing compares to being there in person.
I think you're right. And so that was a cool place to go in the summer. Really, I would recommend that for any family. It's really a cool experience. There's a lot of, in the town of Jackson has got sort of, it's a weird mix. I mean, you have this sort of cowboy vibe because it was, right? But there's a ton of wealth and money there. So you'll have like an art gallery with like, $1 million paintings next to a shop that sells boots and cool belt buckles, but it's kind of unique in a way, but just the beauty of it is awesome. And in the winter, the resort is there's a lot of great condos. There's a Four Seasons. There's a ton of really, really high end hotels. I think there's a couple of mid-price hotels, big resort, but I always say this about Jackson, like I didn't love the skiing there. And I think it's just because it's so big, I just didn't know where I was going, and I was sort of limited at that point by my ability. And I felt like I stayed on the same trails. And Ryan, we separated a couple times. There's one funny story in the book. We separated because he ditched me, and all of a sudden I find myself in this kind of cliffy area with.
That seems to be a trend, Rob.
Yeah, that's a trend, right? He would be like, yeah, Dad, come with me, and then he's gone, right? And I'm like left looking around, and I'm like, I'm lost. And this is probably, I don't know, maybe like fourth or fifth year, but I still stunk. And the one thing you never should do is take your skis off and try to slide down on your bum. It is the worst thing you can do. And I got to this point where I was in this area with a lot of little kind of cliffy jump things where you'd have to, if you were a really good skier, you just kind of leap from like plateau to plateau and get to a place where it was better. And I remember looking and thinking, if I can just get down to there, I'm going to be okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slide on my butt. I'm going to hold my skis. I'll get down to that next plateau, and then I'll do the same thing. I'll slide again, and then I'll do that like 3 times, and I'll be able to place where I'll put my skis back on. Well, what I didn't realize when I slid on my butt on the first plateau was I shot off the second plateau, and then all of a sudden I'm in the air going from like plateau to plateau and having no ability to stop myself. And I was like, this is it. This is where it ends.
No.
So, and then when I finally came to a stop,
rolling, tumbling.
I was both, like in the air, like spun around, and I got up and I remember and I yelled, I can't be killed, because I just couldn't believe that I was still alive. Of course, then I realized that I had like one ski on plateau number 1, the other ski on plateau number 2, one pole on plateau number 1, one pole in a tree. And I was like, now what do I do? So I called Ryan, and he said, well, where are you? And I said, I don't know. I don't know the names of any trails. Well, you know that. And he said, well, call Ski Patrol. And I called Ski Patrol, and they, of course, said, well, where are you?
Where are you?
I'm in this place where there's a lot of rocks and there's some trees. And the guy said, sir, there's a lot of rocks and trees. And I was like, well, I can see the tram. And he's like, all right, that narrows it down a little bit. And then just then a snowboarder came buzzing down, and he started grabbing all my stuff and collected it for me. So I was like, I think I'm good. So
Thank goodness.
I used to say to Ryan every time something like that happened, I have 9 lives. I'm on to like number 4. like we're we were starting to run out. So luckily, I started to get better and I made better decisions. Great resort, cool, a really cool experience, a fun place to go. I think if I went back now, I'd enjoy the skiing a little more. I was there when I just wasn't good enough to really enjoy it. I think there's a lot of cool backcountry runs there where if you have a guide, you can leave the resort in a legal way. There's some backcountry runs where you're not supposed to go, or you can only go on certain conditions and with certain equipment and stuff like that. But Jackson has the ability, I think, with a guide from the resort, you can leave what they call side country and really explore some of the really beautiful terrain.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a cool place. So after Jackson and
I was going to ask you if you had anything else in like the continental United States for like real stories that you just really want to tell before. I definitely want to hear about Alaska.
Yeah, so the one place that we ended up going to, a big part of the book is Big Sky, Montana, and we went to Big Sky because Ryan, there was he started researching like the hardest runs, and there's a run inbounds.
Go figure.
Exactly, called Big Couloir. A couloir is it's a corridor in French, a corridor through like rock lined. So it's sort of like a run that runs like a tunnel through the rocks almost, right? And there was a big couloir.
Can I interrupt you real quick? Does he have a GoPro?
So yes, if you go on YouTube and look up Ryan DeLena, DELENA, Ryan's whole skiing experience is in rock climbing and everything he does, and van life and all the fun stuff he does is on YouTube. He's got, if you like and subscribe, he's got some great content, and in every place he's been, places that we'll get into sort of the international travel, every experience, and the runs that are really fun to watch. If you look up Ryan. Extreme Ryan is his nickname. So Extreme Ryan DeLena, Big Couloir. He was 12 years old when we went out to Big Sky and did this run. And the reason it was so monumental is I couldn't do it with him, and we had to hire a guide. And at that, we had tried to hire a couple of guides in Jackson Hole and in Snowbird, and they were bad experiences. They wouldn't let Ryan do the things he wanted to do. It ended up turning into an argument, and he felt bad about himself afterward. And with Big Couloir, I knew the only way he could do it was to hire somebody. And I called and I tried to, I didn't want to say he had issues, but I tried to kind of dance around it a little bit. And I remember the guy saying, "I have just the guy." He said, "I'm gonna recommend this guy Ben Brousseau." And Ben Brousseau has become kind of instrumental in our lives. And he's a Big Sky ski guide, and he's become a great friend. Went on to travel the world with Ben. But this day at Big Sky was really important in Ryan's development. He did this run, and Big Sky became our place. So from there, we've gone back multiple times. I've probably been to Big Sky 20 times. And it's the one place in the U.S. If I had to move to, live, retire, ski just this one place for the rest of my life, I would ski in Big Sky, Montana. It's the best resort in the U.S. from a ski standpoint. But Montana is also just a great state. I mean, you fly into Bozeman.
Yeah, like what else is there? There's got to be.
Yeah,
it's some beautiful country.
Unbelievable. I mean, the terrain is so beautiful. People are cool. And it's the kind of place where there's a lot of wealth. I mean, the Yellowstone Club is this billionaire's playground, which is like adjacent to Big Sky. And a lot of those folks will ski in Big Sky, and you'll never know it. If they're there in Big Sky and they're, and I can name off some celebrities and some really wealthy people who I know ski in Big Sky, and they got a helmet and goggles on and they're hardcore skiers. They're just like you and me. They're there to ski, and it's got a cool, I think, vibe as a result of that.
Not like me, Rob.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
But like you.
But like me. Like you'd never know. You'd be on the chairlift and you'd never know. And there's no, I don't know. People just don't put on airs. I mean, it's really just it's a very, I don't know,
down to earth
slice of Americana, right? It's like it's like there's a risk here. And Big Sky is the one place. There's some runs there that I can't believe, the lawyers haven't taken over and said, no, you can't do this, and you have to sign 47 waivers, and and be on video saying you're a dummy for doing this, but they let you do it, and as that disappears in this country, it's a shame. But I think it's one place where they let people take risks, and if you get hurt, you get hurt. I mean, there's a lot of injuries out there, and a year doesn't go by where somebody doesn't die in bounds because there's avalanche risks, there's terrain risks, there's weather risks. I mean, but that's why we do this, because the reward is worth it. So Big Sky, put that on your list. I mean, I can go deep on places to stay and all that stuff, but it's a great resort. You really will. It's a little harder to get to, and I think that's part of the allure because there are times when I'm at Snowbird and if you're in Christmas week and I'm looking around saying, is everybody from New York and Boston here? Because I try to get away from you people. That's why I'm here.
Especially New Yorkers.
Exactly. And they're just yelling at the coffee guy because he's not making their coffee fast enough. It's like you're on vacation, relax. And so Big Sky doesn't have any of that. So it's a cool place. So that became a big part of our development. And the reason I mentioned Ben Brousseau, the guide, was after we'd gone to Big Sky a couple of times and we really connected with him. He was part of this ski group called the North American Ski Training Center. And NASTIC had this trip to Portillo, Chile. And he called me up and said, have you guys ever considered going to Chile to ski? And I said, Ben, I didn't even know there was snow in Chile. And why would I go there in the summer? And he said, well, the summer is the southern hemisphere has different, it flips. It's winter down there in the summer. And I said, you know what? I remember that from science class in sixth grade. I hadn't really thought about it.
Something stuck, but you just didn't think about
I
it.
didn't really think about it. So I went online, I started looking around, and I looked up this NASTIC group, and they seemed, it was like adult ski camp, but they worked on teaching skiing too. So for me, I thought it would be beneficial, and I thought, for Ryan too, he could, take more advanced, lessons, and he would be with Ben and they could do the harder stuff. And I would be with the old guys trying to do some of the easier stuff. So we planned it, we went. And so, at that point, Ryan had been on a plane to Utah and to California. So he'd been on a plane for 4 or 5 hours. Portillo, we flew to Atlanta, and then Atlanta to Santiago. And then from Santiago, we took a couple hour van ride up these crazy roads, switchbacks. You're on the edges of mountains, but I really loved it. I mean, Chile is a beautiful country. Santiago is a very cosmopolitan city. It's a fairly safe city, I think. I mean, there's definitely some problem spots, but you feel walking around, you don't feel unsafe.
Yeah, there's problem spots everywhere, though, right?
Probably everywhere, right? I mean, and so it really, Chilean people are phenomenal, really high end, high energy, upbeat, happy, probably the happiest people I think I've ever encountered. I mean, they really are. A guy could be pushing a broom, and like looking at in the subway and he's smiling away. They really just are content.
What's the cost like there?
So, the trip is expensive because of the ski resort that is kind of has a captive audience, I think. And it's a small resort where if you really want to ski there, they know they have you. So they think that the expense was more there, but the flights to Santiago weren't that expensive. And then hotels and restaurants in Santiago weren't that expensive at all. I mean, it would be cheaper than, New York or Boston, I would say.
Sure.
And there's a lot of wine country there. Chile is a really interesting country because you have a ton of coastline, and then you have sort of a valley in the middle, which has a lot of wineries, and then you have mountains, and the mountains are pretty amazing. I mean, they're massive, and so we start working our way up in this van up to the resort, and Portillo. There's several resorts in Chile which are worth checking out, but Portillo is probably the easiest, I'd say, because once you get there, it's kind of all inclusive. It's one hotel. You eat meals in this dining room. You eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner there. You get a set, dining, time, and depending on the size of your group, there's a couple of bars. There's a disco, which is this little bar that looks like, I don't know, like a frat house basement, really, that opens at midnight. And, there's kind of a South American vibe down there that like people will party till 4 a.m. I have yet to see the disco. I don't think I've ever been awake at midnight to see it.
As far as anyone else
Ryan got
knows.
older, he started to go, but I need to late. But I have I've been there before it opens. But it's a cool place, great skiing. It's a little condition dependent, I would say. Like Santiago in their winter, which is August and July, it's like 50 or 60 degrees. I mean, it really doesn't get cold in Santiago. It's like Seattle, very moist. And the only reason they have, ski terrain is that the mountains are so high that up high, they'll get snow. And there's some years where it's amazing, and some years where they just don't get a lot. And so we've been there 5 or 6 times. I think one year was pretty rough, where there really wasn't much terrain open, but most of the other years have been pretty good.
And they don't make it like we do here.
They do a little. Portillo has a couple of runs they'll make snow on. There's a lot of Olympic teams will train there. You'll see, like, we saw the German Olympic team one year, and the U.S. Olympic team will go there every once in a while. You'll see like the junior Olympic team, and
Oh,
so
that's cool.
they have to make it, I think, for those kind of folks. But the week we go is more of a tourist week. I mean, it's in August, and I don't know, it's a very fun experience. I mean, if you're a hardcore skier, your season ends in April or March, and you really don't get started till December or January. It's an awesome way to kind of cut that season in half, that off season. You all of a sudden you're skiing for a week in August, and you really, you don't really have that sort of downtime. You have this trip to look forward to, and then by the time you get back, it's it's looking down the barrel of September, and ski season's around the corner. So it's a really fun experience. I mean, the Portillo trip is expensive, and there's no way around it because of the all-inclusive nature of it. It's I want to say it's about 12,000 for the week.
Hmm.
And we were two to a room, so it wasn't as bad. But if you went by yourself, they still charge the 12, I think. So and
Wow.
the food used to be it was amazing. They struggled, I think, during COVID. They lost 2 seasons, and I went last year, and it just, I don't know. The food was still good, but they used to have like 50 guys in the dining room, and the wait staff was very attentive, and it seemed like they were down to 10 waiters. I mean, I think they really had to let some people go, and then I think they just lost the ability to find help because that help couldn't depend on the place. All of a sudden they
Sure.
lost their jobs, and it's not like you can just pluck people from town. I mean, they're up in the middle of nowhere, so they really needed. I know guys that worked as luggage handlers who they would introduce me to their son. They had been working there so long, and now their kids were working there. I mean, it's one of those places I think they had consistent help, and you have this 2 year gap where it screwed everything up. So I think they'll get back
Well,
to where
yeah,
they
I was gonna
were.
say, I think the moral of the story for that is keep going. And anybody who think about going, still go.
Oh,
They
definitely
just
go.
they
The
need
food is
people to keep going, or else.
Yep. Yep, for
Yeah.
sure. And the hotel is, it's European style. The rooms are small. It's dated, but it's certainly nice enough. They help couldn't be better. They clean your room every day, twice a day. Every time you leave the room, it seems like the lady sneaks in and cleans your room. I mean, they have these sort of old Chilean women who they have like a station on each floor, and they get to know your sort of schedule. They do your laundry. I mean, it's really a cool experience. I can't recommend it enough. I've
That's
also
perfect.
gone to a couple other resorts. Valle Nevado is another resort that's more of a kind of a condo town. There's a lot of townhouses and condos, but there's 3 resorts that all connect: El Colorado and La Parva are the 3 resorts. Valle Nevada is the main one. I've only been there once. I went last year for the first time, and it was a good experience. I liked it. Portillo is a little more, it feels like a cruise ship where everybody's in it together and you're all eating together and you see the same people. Valley Nevada, it draws from all of these different condo units, so it's a bit more like a traditional American resort, I think, in that sense. But fun vibe. I mean, a lot of crazy South Americans, a lot of crazy Americans. I mean, you're skiing. Anybody that would give up summer to go skiing is a little bit nuts, and so you get this kind of fusion of crazy people from all over the world, and a lot of really high energy place, good food.
Any crazy stories?
There, we were only there for 3 or 4 days. There was it, it, I'd say more of a nightlife there than Portillo, where I'm old and tired, so I tend to crap out quick. But we've skied with in Portillo. There's a lot of kind of famous people in our ski world, that are kind of famous backcountry skiers, or and you get to see them sort of, just regular people, right? Ryan has conquered a run at Portillo, and it's called the Super C, which is this run you have to hike about 4 or 5 hours and cut across this crux where if you fall you die kind of thing. It's across these rocks, and then you access this 5 or 6 thousand foot untouched run that only a handful of people on earth can do, because number one, they couldn't do the hike, and they're not crazy enough to do the crux and then the skiing itself. And so I've never done it. I'd like to think I could. I don't want to do the hike, but but he's done that with some kind of well-known names, and I think he's put himself in a category of folks who have done it. For him, I think it's become a special place, and it's a fun place. I really would recommend anybody that misses skiing and go, because it's a cool experience, and it's not like you're going to the dead of winter where it's dark. Like it's different there. The sun is pretty bright and stays out, and it's just they get a lot of moisture, and you're at 14,000 feet, and that turns to snow. But it doesn't feel like you're. I mean, I've been cold there, but I haven't gone there and had a week of like 0 degrees. I mean, the weather tends to be kind of nice during the day, where it's if it's 50 and you think that sounds cold, well, the sun is hot. I mean, you're skiing in a shirt and a windbreaker and putting sunblock on, so it's a good time. Definitely
That's
recommend it.
very, very, very cool.
And then the last piece to the sort of Ben puzzle. So after Ben
Yeah.
got us down to Portillo, when we were in Portillo, somebody came up to us and asked if we ever had thought about skiing in Antarctica. I never know to say in or on, because it's an island. But so let's say in Antarctica. And I laughed and said, no, that's ridiculous. And no human goes to Antarctica, like unless you're like in a whaling vessel or something. Like, I'm not going to Antarctica. And so I said no. And then
That's where you went.
and so then Ben called me like a couple of months later and said, hey, this trip called Ice Axe Expeditions I might be a guide on it if you guys want to go and look it up. And I looked it up, and I was like, this looks pretty awesome. Like, there's a bunch of people skiing in the sunshine, and there weren't any igloos. There were penguins everywhere, but there weren't any whaling vessels that I could see. And it looked, I don't know, there was icebergs in the distance, and it just looked different than anything. And so I let Ben talk us into it. And lo and behold, we were on our way in November of that year to Antarctica. And you start by flying to Buenos Aires in Argentina. And then you change airports there. And then you fly to a place called Ushuaia. And Ushuaia is the southernmost town in the world. It's kind of like Magellan and pirates, and it's got this sort of. They used to have a prison. They used to be where South America sent their crazy
What?
convicts.
Is the building still there?
I think it is. I never remember seeing it, but they sell a lot of prison garb, like in all the gift shops. There's a lot of prison related. It's kind of like, remember Papillon, the movie? Like, there was that French prison in Guyana where the French used to send all these people in Guyana, and it was just this island basically where. So it kind of reminded me of that, but I never have seen it. But I think it does still exist. So Ushuaia also is a lot of the cruises in the summer will go to Antarctica, but they'll never get out of the boat. So a lot of these big cruise ships will go out of there. So it's kind of a cruise town. A lot of good restaurants and kind of a cool vibe, honestly. If you just went to Ushuaia, which is in Patagonia, the Patagonia region of South America, you'd get your money's worth. There's some amazing hiking you can do in Patagonia that you access from Ushuaia. Beautiful, beautiful, turquoise lakes and mountains, and like horses that kind of run free, the wild horses. Really kind of a neat place. And
I mean, I've definitely heard that Patagonia is a life-changing experience to go just spend time there.
Absolutely. And I remember when Ryan and I, we hiked around before our boat was going to leave for Antarctica, and we did this beautiful hike in Patagonia. And I remember we got back to the hotel and thinking, like, we might not even remember this. Like we still have like 14 days to go, and we're going to Antarctica. Like, this is going to seem like nothing in comparison. And it ended up being true. I mean, so when I look back at my pictures from Patagonia, it looks cool, but then you take this 2-day ship ride across the Drake Passage, which is the wildest seas in the world. It's where the Southern Ocean, the Atlantic, and the Pacific all converge, and the winds are just incredible. The seas, you get 40-foot seas. And if you get seasick at all, this is not the trip for you. You do not want to go to Antarctica. And our ship tossed and turned all over the place, and everything in the room topples over, and the doors slam shut. You just roll in bed all night, and it's really.
How did you guys do?
So we didn't throw up. I mean, we took some Dramamine here and there. Neither of us really get seasick, and we didn't know at the time. But it's hard to sleep. I mean, it's kind of exhausting because you're just rolling all night. But I watched people throw up their guts off the railing and thinking like I'm better off than that guy. Like and it's once you see somebody throw up, you really can't look at them any other way. There were guys I couldn't look at the same after watching them just lose it. But people who get seasick, it's about 24 to 36 hours. And then when you get to the bay where Antarctica begins, it's very placid. It's calm. Like you just have to survive that. And then all of a sudden it becomes different. And
What's it like for you guys? And this is not a travel related question necessarily. Well, it is, but not a destination or not a travel story type thing. But just my own curiosity, just because I know the relationship with you and Ryan is so special. What's the conversations like when you guys are riding in a boat like that in a room together for how long that is on the boat?
yeah, that's
What do you guys talk about? What do you do?
we've been twice. And the first time we went, it was also new, and I was very nervous because I didn't know what I was getting into. Now at this point, remember, I knew once we got there we were going to ski, but there's no ski lifts or helicopters or cat machines. We had to climb up the mountains. We had to skin up, which is you put this felt material on the bottom of your skis, and then you have a binding that releases at the heel, so it's almost like cross country skiing up a hill. And I had only done it once, and I wasn't very good at it, so I was really nervous about what I didn't want to like blow it and have like limit his experience. So I was kind of in my head a little. He was excited, I think. I think he was, he really wanted to get there. But when we had the couple of days going over, and then even once we got there, it was the first time we didn't have any Wi-Fi and our phones were useless. And so there was a lot of time to just talk. And that was when we actually talked about the book for the first time. I said,
So the book didn't exist yet?
no, we hadn't existed. And I said to him, we've always talked a little bit around how his story at this point, he was back in high school and he was thriving and we were traveling all these cool places. And, he had sort of proven everybody wrong. And I thought it was a compelling story and I thought people could benefit from it. And, we raised the idea of writing it, on the trip. And we had so much downtime where we didn't know what to do that I started writing right on the boat. I mean, I said to him, I'm going to just start writing. And then I said to him, here's a list of things you could write. And I think he did a little bit of writing on the trip. I think he was still, ready to ski every day. So and it was, they did presentations and stuff. There was a lot of science and a lot of, the history of Antarctica. Like he would go to all the presentations and, I was usually so wiped out, I'd stay in the room and I'd just start writing the book. So, but we had some great conversations and we had a lot of time to meet new people and just talk. And everybody on the ship was in the same boat. And all of a sudden, literally everybody's phone was useless. And, you never even saw them, right? Except for when people were taking pictures. And so, dinner conversations lasted an extra hour and, the conversations before dinner and, people just really were able to, not just, hey, what do you do for a living or, where you're from? I mean,
You're actually like forming bonds with people before you even get there.
Yeah. So it was
That's cool.
very cool.
That's very cool.
It was kind of sad. Like once the trip ended, we pulled into the bay and all of a sudden we had Wi-Fi again and everybody just went back to their phones.
Sure. How many people were on those boats?
It was about 100, and so there were probably 30 guides, 40 guides maybe, and then 60 clients.
That is not a lot of people.
No, it's we had
It's pretty intimate.
We had our own rooms, or you had one roommate. I had Ryan, obviously, but it was an old it was a fishing kind of vessel or that had been converted, so the rooms were nice, but it wasn't like a big giant cruise ship. It was fairly small, and the dining room was, we all ate in the same dining room, and so it was kind of awesome. I would say it was.
It's pretty cool.
We made it. I remember thinking it was so expensive. I'm like, oh, I'm never going to do this again, and this was once in a lifetime, trip of a lifetime. And there was a sort of a sadness when you got back because first of all, Antarctica, I should say, like, it's the most beautiful place I've ever seen. I mean, I can't put into words. There's no ozone layer really there. So the sun is so bright that everything just sparkles and shines. And there's not many colors. It's like white and blue, right? I mean, there's really this. But the ocean just takes on this purple turquoise, and the snow just looks different. There's penguins everywhere, and they don't have any predators on land, so they come right up to you. I mean, they don't know enough
Oh
to
my
be afraid of you.
gosh.
And they poop everywhere. They poop this like orange pink,
Well, now you've ruined
you know.
the image for me.
Even that is cute when you're watching it. Like they even do that nice, and they're kind of amazing creatures. They really are, and they can climb anything. They have these sort of claws, like you don't expect that, and they're like torpedoes in the water. I mean, it really is kind of cool, and it just the icebergs float by, and it's just I don't know, it's mesmerizing. Every morning we would wake up in a different place because we would travel during the night, and you just walk out on deck, and we'd all just be there with our jaws and just looking around like, holy cow, like look at this. And it's and then we'd get these Zodiac rides over, and the guides would say, we're this is where we're going, we're skiing that one today. And they had been there a number of times, so they knew what was safe and what wasn't. I mean, there's a lot of crevasses, and you could be skiing over something, and they call it a snow bridge. I mean, it's just a big hole with snow over it, and you don't know it, and you could fall into one. So we would climb rope together. So if one of us fell in, the other guys would just drop to the ground and kind of hold them, and it never happened. But and then skiing down, I guess they just kind of know where to go, or you're skiing fast enough where maybe you wouldn't fall in the hole. But there's a lot of risk, I think, but it's worth it. It was really a special place, and I never thought we'd go back. The only reason we went back a couple years later, 3 years later. Ryan at that point was training to become a professional guide, and he was asked to be like an apprentice guide on the trip. And he was going to go, and then I was like, well, I'm not going to let him go by himself. I'm going if he's going. So I went too, and I got to go again and met a whole other group of guys that I'm still friends with today. So not many people can say they've been twice, and I feel pretty blessed to have had that experience. And it's not one of those things I'd recommend to everyone. I mean, I'd say if you could take a cruise, if you're, there's a lot of older people who take cruises, and you're adventurous, a cruise, from Ushuaia, across the Drake, it wouldn't be as rough on a big cruise ship. It would be rough, but not as rough. And then just to see Antarctica would be worth it. It wouldn't be as special as what we did because we were on, we
You
were
were
on the
there.
snow. We walked
Yeah.
around, we saw the penguins, we were part of it. I don't know if there's trips like that where they'd even just let you get out and walk around, but it's an amazing, amazing place. And I don't know, the world just seems different when you come back. It's small. It just, you realize that there's just parts of it that are left that people haven't spoiled and ruined yet. I mean, there's evidence of people the whaling industry did leave behind, and there's a couple of science centers there, but for the most part, it's still untouched.
This honestly, this is exactly why I think travel matters so much,
Mm-hmm.
because if you don't travel and see, even if it's just other places in the United States, you cannot expand your horizons, and your world is so small. And it really is. So it's not just like you went to Antarctica and you came back and it felt small. It is small if you don't
Yeah.
go out and see things.
No, I mean,
So
from Boston to Ushuaia, you're there in 24 hours. And then it's a couple of days across. A day and a half. So I mean, so really, like if in 3 days you go from Boston, Massachusetts to Antarctica. And it's doable, right? And we can do that. And we have the ability. It's 2 plane rides and a boat ride, and you're there. And so it's an amazing world, and I think it's worth seeing. You'd go in a season when it's 24 hours of daylight to experience that. It's pretty awesome. I mean, it's
did that mess with you?
it does. Yeah. It's really, I mean, you wake up at 3 in the morning and it's like bright as bright can be. And it does, I think, mess with your body clock a little bit. You just don't know when to go to sleep, and it's, you feel a charge though. Like, I think when your body sees sunshine, it thinks it should be awake. So I don't remember ever really feeling tired. We always felt like we were ready to go. And
That's cool.
it was pretty great. So, second time I had a better group of people. I really met some cool guys, and Ryan was a guide, and we were in different groups, which was kind of cool. He was sort of on his own. We just didn't have the sunshine the second time. We had a lot of cloudy days, and I don't know. It wasn't as great. I have to say, it was fun. It was still fun for a lot of the same reasons, but there's something about when the sun is out there. It really is kind of unique. that's sort of the highlight trip. I mean, that's sort of where the book, ends and from our travel. From there, I've gone back to Argentina. I've gone back to Chile. I went to Japan this year.
Yeah, I was going to say I wanted to touch on Japan, and I definitely we're getting near the end, but I want to touch on Japan, and I also want to hear about helicopter skiing,
Yeah,
heli
so I've
skiing.
heli skied in Chile. I've done it in Utah outside of Snowbird as well the first time, and then a couple times in Chile, in a beautiful valley behind the resort. The helicopter doesn't go very far, but it takes you to a very different aspect that's really really beautiful. In fact, where you heli ski in Chile is right near. You ever see the movie Alive when that plane crashes and they had to eat each other? The rugby team from, I forget where they were from. They were South American. It's a famous movie, but it has been
Yeah,
remade a number of times. That's right, kind of near where that plane crashed. It was right behind that resort. So I had done it a few times, and then went to Alaska to do it, to a trip that's just for heli skiing. So you fly to Anchorage, and it's called Majestic Heli, and you take a couple hour ride up the Chugach Mountains, I think it is, and to this little kind of town in the middle of nowhere near Wasilla, Alaska. And then you're in this kind of high end cabiny experience with good food. And the cool thing about heli skiing is when you get to go, it's the best skiing you'll ever do in your life. I mean, just incredible snow, long runs, great terrain. You do, you know, 20,000 vertical, 30,000 vertical in a day, which means like 10 runs, and these long, long, long runs that are just like amazing, amazing, amazing. The
yeah,
down
and the snow is hardly touched, right?
hardly touched. You're skiing. They take you to where there aren't any tracks. I mean, very rarely do you get out of the helicopter and see anybody. It's anybody's tracks. Amazing. So I've done it a couple times. The first year we went, we skied maybe 4 or 5 of the 7 days because there's no trees at this part of Alaska, so you're above tree line where you're skiing, and so as a
Which
result,
I imagine that's good and bad, right?
it is.
It's good you're not going to hit anything, but you have nothing to guide you.
That's you just hit on it, right? So, and the helicopter pilot has nothing to guide him or her. When it's the least bit cloudy and the light turns flat light, they call it, it's really hard for them to land the helicopter safely. And it's really hard for you to ski. It's very disorienting. You get almost like a vertigo. And so if it was the least bit cloudy, you don't fly. And all of a sudden you're in this cabin with a bunch of guys who are pissed that they're not skiing, and everybody just starts drinking, and then
Gets more pissed.
it just goes on and on and on. So this last year's trip, we just hit some unfortunate weather where we only skied 2.5 of the 7 days. So we had a lot of downtime in the resort. So you got to know that going in. You get a credit if you don't, like, they guarantee you a certain number of vertical. So if the trip is 10 grand, and you might come home with a $7,000 credit because you didn't ski much, but that means you're going back.
Right. That doesn't cover your flights, it just covers your skiing
Right.
and helicopter rides,
And
right?
it's a credit. There's only a credit if you go back and didn't do it
Yes.
again. So that was unfortunate. But if you're with a good group and you can still have a few laughs. And they did a nice job trying to. They took us snowmobiling one day, which I had never done, it's harder than you think, and it was fun. And then there's a glacier you can go and explore, which sounds boring, but it actually was really cool to see it up close, and you get to kind of duck into these little ice caves and just see.
Well, I think it sounds awesome.
It was kind of neat, honestly. It was. We were out there for a couple of hours, and it felt like it flew by because it was. They take you like different spots and the history of it, and which parts have advanced and which parts have receded, and it was cool. So they tried, I think, to keep us busy. But if you do, once you get up in that helicopter and you land, like it's pretty awesome skiing. There are places you can heli-ski in a resort, like where I skied in heli-skied at Snowbird in Utah. That's a cool place to book heli-skiing because if the helicopter doesn't go, you just go back to the resort and ski. Where we were in Alaska,
Sure.
we didn't have that option. So you got to know that going in that you might have some down days.
So how about Japan before I
Yeah,
reach my final 4 questions for
sure.
you?
Japan Quick was so we had this group that I met on the second Antarctica trip was a plastic surgeon from New Jersey, a local from Big Sky, and Ben, who's the ski guide from Big Sky. And we've become really close. And these guys love to travel, and they're crazy, and they love to ski. So they were always proposing trips. I had done that Valley Nevada in Chile with this crew, and then they proposed Japan. And Ryan usually says no to resort type skiing, and I threw it out there to him thinking he's going to say no, and he jumped on it. He was very excited to go, and he knew I think there was just some amazing terrain to be had, and it wasn't a bad, it's a long trip. You fly to Tokyo, and then from Tokyo to Sapporo. Sapporo is in the Hokkaido province, which is the very northern part of Japan, and they get more snow than maybe anywhere on Earth. I mean, they just get 1,000 inches. I mean, it just, piles on the side of the highway are just like 20 feet tall. It's ridiculous, and it comes in 20, 30, 50 inch storms, and piles up.
Wow.
It's a great country, great food, great people. They speak a lot of English, or enough to at least guide you and help you. They're very helpful. Sometimes their English gets in the way and their directions aren't the right directions, but at least they tried, and they really are a sweet people. I loved being there. I really did love the culture, and I don't know. It's a very unique place. I think it doesn't look like much where the ski resorts are, because it kind of looks like Vermont and New Hampshire. It's kind of these snowy little towns. There's not a lot of development around the resorts. They're kind of built up, and there's a lot of retail, a lot of restaurants, and a lot of nightlife. The Australians and New Zealanders, that's kind of where they ski, and they're pretty rowdy bunch. I mean, big groups of guys, and they're not afraid to have a few. So there's that culture as well, and the skiing is really, really endless. I mean, tons of terrain. The lift system is, like everything in Japan, is efficient and unique, and kind of, I don't know, it makes it fun just going up the hill.
What makes it different?
They have these sort of small little gondolas. They have these sort of weird, like 4 or 6 person gondolas that have like a front seat and a back seat. They
You
have
don't get the gondola from a vending machine, do you?
it does. It looks like that. It looks like something. It looks like something like Godzilla's going to come and tear it apart. Like, it doesn't look real. It looks like a movie set. And then they have these single chairs, which it's like sitting on a pizza box. Like, it's just you, and they go all the way up the mountain, like to the tippity top. I don't know. It's kind of like you're just sitting on this thing. It looks like it's like an amusement park ride. It doesn't look like it should be allowed, but they're cool. And then I don't know. They just they're pretty good about the train is kind of untouched. There's a lot of it's a lot of drainages, the way the mountain sort of drains, and it creates these sort of valleys with like unique aspects. There's a lot of great tree skiing, and just tons and tons and tons of snow. We had a unique week that was very sunny, which in a way you go to Japan to ski in these deep powder days. We didn't get any of that. Ryan and I, that week we were there with these guys, we just happened to catch a sunny week, but you could see everything. It was easy to get around. I didn't mind it. I think I wish we had maybe one day with a bunch of snow. The other thing is there's a big onsen culture. Onsen is this, so they have a lot of these volcanic fed spas in all the hotels. Even your bath water, you have an option to like use the volcanic water. It's
Wow.
sort of yellowy, but it's like this mineral water. So
It's supposed to be so good for you.
it's so good for you. So you go, and there's these tubs with like probably like 18 inches of water. So it's not like a hot tub per se. And you have to shower beforehand and like scrub yourself from head to toe. They don't really love when you talk. Like, you're supposed to kind of sit there quietly, and
It's supposed to open your pores, right?
yeah, and you're naked for the world. They do not believe in any clothing, so it's like you got to get used to that aspect. There's a lot of nakedness, and they don't love tattoos either. So if you have a tattoo, you're supposed to cover it, because the tattoos are I forget what the Japanese mafia is called, but they think you're part of the Yakuza or something.
Wow.
So they don't like tattoos, and they're formal. They're like everything in Japan. I mean, they follow the rules, right? And so, but the water is awesome. It's very relaxing, and we were loud. I mean, we couldn't help. We talk. I mean, we're Americans, and we got shushed a few times, but it became kind of a fun part, like the end of the day skiing, and we'd all go down there and soak in the water for a while. You feel great afterwards, and then you go eat some great sushi or steak, or the food's outstanding. So it's a long trip. But it's worth it. The time difference is a killer. You're 14 hours ahead, and when you come back, like, you flip day and night, and it's really hard to get back on track. Well, I was wide awake in the middle of the night, and I was falling asleep at my desk, in the middle of the day.
No, I definitely find coming back from a place like that is definitely harder for me than getting there, because I can kind of I can kind of try to set myself. So if I'm going on an international flight where there's a big time difference, I set myself on their time the minute I get to the airport. So I'm on their time immediately. But coming back is definitely so hard.
It's rough, right?
You need a day or two at least to just reacclimate.
It took us a while. It took
But it's worth it, right? I
Oh,
mean,
definitely worth it. Now I'd go back. I mean, it really became a place. As a group, we sort of collectively decided like this could be a regular thing. I mean, it really is, a very cool, week to 10 day trip. You're almost guaranteed, good snow, and I don't know. I think that the dollar versus the yen, it felt pretty affordable. I mean, the flights, you know, first class, business class, super expensive. The economy tickets were pretty affordable, I thought, and then the hotels were really a range of.
yeah, but but you don't take economy, right?
No, I was in first. I'll admit it. I was in first. I had to lie down bed. I was not sitting up for 14 hours.
Nice.
I think it was longer than that. It was 15 or 16 hours, um,
Jeez.
but it helped, and so it at least I slept a little, and then coming home, I think they tell you not to sleep, which is kind of crazy to try to get reset yourself. But that's a lot of movies if you don't sleep at all. So
Yeah.
it was a good adventure. I really liked it. Driving on the wrong side of the road and driving on the with the wrong steering wheel, and that part was hard. And Ryan and it was tough to get a rental car. And I guess we learned, and this is a good tip for people, if you want to rent something other than the tiny little cars that the rental car places have, you rent directly from a car dealership. Like they'll rent you directly. So there are some like minivan kind of things that people would rent, which if you're skiing makes a big difference because the car Ryan and I had was like the size of my desk at work. I mean, it really was tiny. We had our ski bags went from the back of the trunk all the way through to the windshield, and they were piled up, so we couldn't see each other. I was in the driver's seat, he was in the passenger seat. We could only talk through the bags. We were listening to the Waze, which is yelling at me in Japanese, trying to get around, and it was not easy, but that part it made it fun. I mean, and if you went to one of the resorts, like the main resort is called Niseko, you could get to Niseko and then never get back in the car. I mean, there's plenty to do right in and around the resort. We bounced around a little bit, and some of the guys we were with, because they were from Big Sky, they were from a resort town. They didn't really want to stay in the one resort. They wanted to kind of explore a little bit. I thought we drove a little too much, to ski different places where Niseko had enough for me. I would have been happy just staying there. So that's, for somebody that goes once, I think I would just pick a hotel at Niseko and just enjoy it. And you can bounce around to different restaurants, but there's plenty to do.
Yeah. Man, I honestly of this, I had, can I be honest? Like for a moment, I was just like, leading into this, I was thinking, how much fun can I have listening to stories about traveling for
I
skiing?
know, right?
And oh my
Yeah.
gosh,
Yeah. It's
this
crazy.
this just wow. But I said I have a final four. I guess it's technically a final five. So
Okay.
if you're ready,
Yeah, for sure.
let's hit the final five. So the first question, we didn't talk much about food. You mentioned a couple of times different things, but I want to know, and it doesn't even have to do necessarily with any of the things that we just talked about, but not at home. Where has been the best meal that you've ever had in your entire life?
Not at home. Where has been? I would say. I mean, I'm Italian, right? So, but the funny thing about being Italian is your home is your best meal. I mean, like I grew up with my grandmother cooking like it was her job. So I can't like Boston has the North End. I think it's probably been travel. I think the food in Japan for me, I love sushi and I love that kind of clean eating. It's everything there was just I don't know, it was just good, but you didn't feel the after effects. So I'd say uh, Japan had some just amazing seafood, and the steak and beef there is to die for. So I think Japan.
Okay. And that seems to be, I've had a couple of people say Japan, and I can only imagine. I was slated to go there a couple of years ago, and just cost wise and for whatever reasons, we went to South America, which I've said before, I would not trade for the world, but I plan to get to Japan at some point, and I'm sure I'll vouch for that as well.
Oh, definitely.
So,
You'll eat like a champ.
one of my most fun questions that I ask, and maybe I should save this one for after, but this is where I ask it typically. Non-traditional question. Of all of the places that you have been, and again, it's not limited to what we've talked about, but any place that you've been anywhere in the world, that if I turned to you right now and said, Rob, here's a free plane ticket and here's a free pass to stay and do whatever you want to do, and you would turn it down and say, nah, I'm good, I don't want to go back.
So, a place I wouldn't want to go again?
That's correct.
Yeah, yeah.
And it could be just, hey, I've done it and I'm good. Or it could be, it wasn't for me. Or you might not have an answer. No one's never had an answer, though. No pressure.
I hate to say because it's like in places that we didn't have a great experience skiing. I probably was too bad a skier to really enjoy it. I've been with my family. I think cities. Like to me, I've been to London, and I thought London is an awesome city, but it's still a city, And so I feel like London or Paris, places like that. I think you want to see it once, and I don't see any reason to go back. Probably more Paris than London, but I'd have to be a place like that for sure.
Very fair. Very fair. And it makes sense. And I'm sure there's probably more to see than what you saw, but I get it. Yeah, I get it 1,000%.
Definitely.
Flipping that 180 degrees, of all the places that you have been, where do you have to go again?
I think I have to go back to Antarctica again. I don't know why, but I don't know why everyone want to go 3 times, but I feel like each trip, the first 2 trips were different in some ways. I was way out of shape for the first one. I trained a lot harder for the second one, and I was like ready, and I had fun, but that was, I think everyone on the boat basically got COVID the second time, and it was the time where if they knew you had COVID, you couldn't ski. So we all had to hide the fact that we were sick.
No.
And I mean, I don't know what, we all got sick, whatever it was, but it definitely impacted me a little. I really wish I had felt better. And it just was bad luck. But I still enjoyed it. But so I think if I go back the third time, I'll be in shape and I won't get sick. And so it'll be the perfect trip. So I'm saying Antarctica one more time.
Perfect. Okay. Where in the world have you not been that you must go?
Let's see. I'm embarrassed to say, with all the skiing we've done, I've never skied in Europe. One of the sort of ski goals is to ski on every continent. Europe is the easiest one everybody gets, but I don't have it yet. So, I always ask people who've been, if I'm going to go, should we go to Austria? Should we go to Italy? Switzerland or France, and everybody has a different answer. I haven't exactly picked where, but I have to ski the Alps. I want to see the sort of European system, and I mean that's where skiing started. And I think it's a great combination of the food is going to be great wherever you go, the people are going to be great, and it's going to have a cool vibe. And so I got to ski Europe somewhere. I don't know exactly where yet, but I will figure that out.
Good answer. Good answer. And the final question that I have for you of the podcast episode is, where are you going? What do you have planned?
So we're talking about South America again. The guys I ski with want to go back to Valley Nevada again. I was saying Nevada. It's Valley Nevada, which is in Chile. So I think we'll probably ski somewhere in South America this year. That could change. There's a couple of places where we haven't been that could win the day. So I'd say that's a lock. I think we'll probably end up somewhere, and then from there we'll see what next winter brings. I wouldn't be surprised to find me in Japan again. I think that's probably on the radar somewhere.
Awesome, Rob. This has been really, really incredible, really entertaining. I love the story of you and your son, and I'm definitely going to listen to the audiobook, and I'm going to watch and subscribe and like his YouTube channel. And
thank you.
I'm really excited to get to know you guys better, and I hope that we stay in touch. Is there anything before we wrap that you would like to add or say? Anything we missed?
No, definitely. I think Ryan should make an appearance on this show. There's a couple places I haven't gone that he's gone that are more in the Arctic, so he can tell you about the North Pole. I've told you a little bit about.
And it sounds like his stories might be a little different than yours.
100%. Like he'll go very deep on the terrain, and he knows more about the names of things.
But we also might hear different versions of the same story.
You're going to get, Dad, if it wasn't for Dad, I would have done 10,000, more things. But I had to drag his, out of shape, old tired bones up the ski hill, keep him alive. But yeah, no, you'll enjoy listening to him for sure.
So awesome. Yeah, set it up, man.
I will.
I'd love to do it. This would be
Definitely.
fantastic.
Definitely. No,
Thank
this
you.
is fun. It's a great format. A really enjoyable conversation.
I appreciate that very much. I appreciate the positive feedback. Thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure.
And yeah, we'll talk again.
Thank you. Take care.
And there's another episode of the Where Have You Been podcast in the books. Thank you so much for listening today. There was another great guest with some great stories, as always, and I hope that you will support all of the guests by checking out the show notes and going to their web pages, seeing any socials and projects that they may have going on. And please, again, I'll ask as always to like, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It really does help to allow the podcast to grow and reach more people, and I appreciate you for doing that. Also, if you haven't done so, check out the website, whybpodcast.com, where you can find blog posts. If you'd like to be a guest, please register to be a guest on the site, and check out the merch page. There's some really cool stuff if you're interested in representing the pod, along with some other cool travel items and apparel that I'm working on every day as well. Join me again next week for another great guest with more incredible stories. New episodes drop every Sunday just after midnight Eastern Time. Until then, thank you for being here, and have a great day.